super excited to be back in this like kind of like duet here that we're gonna have, which today I know we're talking a little bit more about confidence, self-confidence, and just it's funny because we typically, for people listening in, everything we do in our programs, in our coaching, is typically split up in 4 core components, and we think of nutrition. We call it nutrition mastery, which is like, mastering the art of knowing how to eat and when to eat and how to eat and why you're eating. But then there's a big kind of component also on what we call mindset shifting, which is like the way you think. And if you don't learn to change the way you think about food, about yourself, changing the way you eat will never actually help you get to any long-term goals. With that, obviously, the lifestyle revamping, so changing and completely making a complete shift in the way that you live your life, and then at the same time moving and exercise. So those are 4 core components, and I feel like today we're gonna truly focus deeply into that mindset piece, specifically that as to it relates to self-confidence, right? And I know you kind of have some questions and some things like that you wanted to ask me. So why don't you just kind of like take it away?
Yeah, for sure. So I think an important point you touched on is you can make all these changes in your nutrition, and maybe you'll lose some weight with that. But what happens usually? Like, I think a lot of people think that weight loss will always lead to self-confidence. Like they think that that is the one thing that's holding them back from being confident in themselves. But what do you typically see with clients?
Well, first, I like definitions. It's understanding really what self-confidence is, because for different people that means different things, right? And I ask a question to all of our clients that come into our program, which is, number one, what is that renewed best version of yourself? Like, what is like that 2.0 version of you? And basically they say, well, it's a person that, is like X amount of weight lighter. I can put this, clothing on, I can do these things and stuff like that. And then I ask, okay, so, and sometimes that goes in line with their goals. And at the same time, I ask the question, how is your life going to be different when you accomplish this goal, in your opinion? And a lot of times, like, people really take a little while to try to think about that, because sometimes people don't think of, the feelings. They are there because that's what's kind of getting them to say, I want to change. But they're not really thinking of how that's actually going to make them feel, because they feel that getting to a specific goal is going to give them happiness and fulfillment and satisfaction. So self-confidence usually is a definition, a combination of those things. And I like to, before we get into like more nutrition specific things or weight loss or these things, it's really important to start to think, for example, when we talk about money, right? A lot of people want to make a lot of money, right? But if you don't understand why, like why you actually want to make it a lot of money and what you want to do with it and what's going to happen when you have it, people tend to be very, very unsatisfied and unfulfilled in their lives. And if you don't believe me, go and look at Hollywood, right? How many actors and actresses and really famous people, even sometimes like athletes, like professional athletes that are like big, massive stars, they're not mentally prepared for stuff like that. They don't understand exactly why they want what they want. Or sometimes it's given to them and they have no idea because they were not prepared mentally for that kind of thing. And you see like the highest rates of depression, the highest rates of like unhappiness. And these people have what for me, people like us, we consider like, well, what if you have $1 million in the bank right now? Right? People be like, oh my God, all the things that I'll be able to do, right? But a lot of times it's like you get to that point and like, okay, what's next? The second example I typically give when it comes down to fulfillment and in achieving that moment in which you reach your goal is going to be a big high of rate of like depression is actually seen in Ironman athletes after they finish the race. And it's not long lived. It usually doesn't last as long, but it's, when you're working so hard to work towards that goal, which is a literal goal to cross that finish line in an Ironman triathlon, which is, literally for the average time, like the fastest is 9 hours, and that's insane, to the average being like 12 to 14 hours or so, where you're running, you're biking, you're swimming an insane amount. I think altogether it's like 120, 130 something miles, and when you're preparing yourself for months and years for that moment and you cross that line, you're like, oh my God, I did it. Right. And you have that incredible rush of like, excitement and all that kind of stuff. But a day later, they sit down and they're like, okay, like now what, right? What am I trying to work towards to right now? And that's what happens with people that kind of get to goals and they don't understand exactly why they're doing it, and how is their life going to be different, and also thinking about, okay, what's going to be next after that. So self-confidence is like, most people think when it comes down to weight loss, that once they get to a specific number, they're going to feel like they don't need anything else, like, right, like this is like my happiness is going to be, achieved, and my confidence and everything's going to go back to what it used to be, or I'm going to get to a point where I've never been before, and it's going to be like an incredible breakthrough for me. And most people typically get to that point without understanding exactly what to do afterwards, or why they're doing it, and all those different things like that. And it's never enough, right? They get to that point and they're like, okay, like I want more and I want more. And people sometimes like go in different routes, whether they become obsessed, right? And then like they keep pushing and pushing and pushing, or they simply kind of get unmotivated because what they thought was what they wanted, it's not really giving them the feelings that they thought they would obviously obtain getting to that point, pretty much.
Yeah. And so within the program, how do you typically address that if someone comes to you with very low self-confidence, just is not showing up in their life in a way that they want to, just feeling like nothing is going right? Where do you start with those kind of people?
The 5 whys. So there's an exercise that somebody did with me a while back, and when I was actually kind of struggling with my own personal kind of like confidence, in terms of like, and we deal with this like professionally, and I think in some ways we call it imposter syndrome, where we don't believe we're capable of doing, of helping people, for example, or being able to be a great dietitian, or build a successful nutrition coaching business and different things like that. So that feeling of not trusting ourselves because we don't believe that we're worthy of it, or we believe that we're capable of doing it. And it actually happens a lot in the people that come to me. And then they always come and it's like a very shallow goal, right? And it's not necessarily shallow, it just sounds shallow, which is like, oh, I just want to lose 20 pounds. So then we start to try to dive deeper. And then like when I have calls with some of these people before they even join the program, it's like they're not expecting those questions, right? Like, you're a nutritionist, you're going to tell me how to eat, right? And they just simply come to me and they're like, okay, yeah, I want to lose 20 pounds. And then they're expecting, okay, cool, like here's exactly how we're going to do it. We're going to eat this and we're going to eat that. But the reality is, I ask him, okay, why do you want to lose 20 pounds? And then they pause you for a second. I was like, well, because whatever. And then usually they have different things, such as, well, because like that's exactly where I was, like, like 3 years ago, and I can't believe I kind of got to this point. I was like, okay, so, and why do you want to get to that point where you were at 3 years ago? Oh, because I was like confident, and my clothes like typically fit better, and now things like don't fit anymore. And why do you think like your clothes fitting better is going to actually help you, or how, or why you think that's important to you, like, how your clothes fit? And then they start to talk, and then sometimes it gets harder to answer those questions, so they pause for a second. I was like, take your time to think about it, because this is important. And then they go in depth and just start to think things such as, well, like I don't remember the last time that I was intimate with my husband, because I was very ashamed of my body. I'm like, okay. And how does that make you feel? Like frustrated. And people get emotional talking about this stuff, right? And it's like, and why is your intimacy with your husband important? So we go even deeper into those different things like that. And then, I mean, that's when typically people at times have to break down, because they start to understand, like, okay, my relationship is in jeopardy. Other times it's going to be related to health. Like, why is important losing like 40, 50 pounds important to you? Well, because I just want to be healthy. And what do you want to be healthy? Oh, because I just, I want to, gain the confidence, fit better in clothes and stuff like that. It's like, but why is that important though? And then they go into in depth, and it's like, well, actually I went to the doctor and they told me I'm on the verge of being diabetic, and that runs in my family. And I cannot even, I'm 30 years old, and I don't want to, it scared me so much. I don't even want to go into that route. Okay. So it's not the confidence, is not the clothing. It's like, because you're at the verge of you getting into a chronic disease that at 30 years old, that can actually keep you, and it can actually cost you so much in the future, right? So you're trying to reverse that, because your doctor says either you do something different, or I'm going to put you on medication to be able to manage this at 30 years old on diabetes medication. So these are the things that people need to understand before they, at least they work with me, because if they don't have a clear like understanding of why, like that's exactly what gets them out of, when you think about you and you think about why you're going to school, like you don't go to school just simply to get a degree. When you start to deeper, it's like, okay, why do you want to go to school? Because I want to get a degree. Right. And why do you want to get a degree? Well, because I want to be a good, nutrition coach or dietitian or whatever may be the case. But why do you want that? And then you start to think, well, I want to help people. And why do you want to help people? Right.
Yeah, and I think it sort of comes down to living your life in a way where you feel like you're living with purpose and you're living in a way that's meaningful to you and making a difference, so that you're able to wake up every day and feel excited for that. And I think that when you get down to it, it comes down to a lot of really deep things about like the meaning of life and our connections with other people. And on the surface, it might be these like a weight loss goal, or it might be um, you know going through a degree. But when you really dig deep, it's a lot more than that.
Yeah, it's like when people ask me, okay, why do I want to establish a successful business? It took me a while to try to figure it out, but I want to achieve financial freedom for my family. But why is that important to you? Well, because I grew up in a family that had it all and lost it all, and I don't ever want to go through that ever again, because it played a toll on me, right? Growing up, and this is kind of part of like that kind of issues with my self-confidence came in, which is, I'm not worthy of being successful, helping other people, or coaching other people, or having a business. So that to me was something that took some work, inner work, to try to understand that this is why we're doing it. This is what gets me out of out of bed in the morning. And people that struggle with their goals, right, and motivation and building strong habits, we have a lot of people like that that's really truly struggle. They haven't gotten to a point where they really make this so like so dive so deep into why they're doing this, that the why is not strong enough. And when the why is not strong enough, or they haven't figured out yet what it is, then they're going to struggle. And no matter what we do and what we give them and how much help we tell them and how many macros we give them and all the resources we give them, they're always going to either fail, or they're going to half-ass like whatever they do, because it's not important. And it's crazy that I think about this all the time, because I work with people that were not prepared. That's the thing, though, the way I explain it. You're just not ready for this because you haven't determined exactly why you're doing it in the first place. And people sometimes sign up with us, and sometimes they fall through the cracks, and because I should be more better at like understanding that. But sometimes I realize like, hey, you're not ready for this. And they go through the program and they are not always very successful. And they know, and they tell me, it's like, it's not the program. I just didn't do what I was supposed to do. And I talked to them a year later, and they're like, they lost a lot of weight, or they did all these different things. It's like, what changed? I asked them. It's like, I just, it's like you said, I was not ready, and I identified it and understood exactly why this was important to me. And usually that gets triggered by something. People sometimes like kind of change their life and understand obviously why they're doing it because of something somebody says, or because of something that they saw, a picture that they saw. Like so many of my clients come to me, is like, I just saw a picture of me in a wedding, and I just couldn't understand how I allowed myself to get to this point. And I'm like, okay, so why do you want to change it? And then we go through that entire process to understand why this is important to them. And when the why is strong, like my mentor always told me, that when the why is strong enough, always the how appears. Right. And that always kind of like applies to anything, right? Like in anything in our lives, like when you were moving to Toronto, right? Like you were trying to find an apartment. If you would have just kind of given up on the first couple tries, or you're trying to find an apartment, you would have been like, hey, you know what, I may not be able to do this, and I'm just gonna have to find an alternative. No, because your wife's strong enough. You're going to school in Toronto, and like, because this is obviously something important to you, so I'm gonna figure it out. So every single time people think like, I can't do this, I can't do that. No, you can't do it. You just don't know why you're doing it in the first place. And you just are trying to find excuses as to why this is obviously not something, not priority, or something not important right now.
Yeah, that's a really good point you make about moving, because if anyone, so say you got a job in a different city and you had to move to that city and you're going through that apartment hunting process like I was, your why is you absolutely have to move to that city. There's no way you're not going to find something. So if you have that same level of why applied to your health journey, you're totally right. Like it is just you need the stronger why there. I think that is a very good comparison.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a big thing.
and so starting with people's whys, that's a really good spot for beginning with self-confidence. If anyone else is uh, if they go through their why and they're still struggling uh, with not feeling good about themselves, with not feeling worthy, as you talked about, do you have any other suggestions for how people can start to do that inner work and like what you did as you were starting to go through that journey?
Yeah, so I like to think of our program and creating sort of like, people's personal scoreboards, right? And it's thinking, how do we define your success? What defines you achieving something positive in this? Like, what happens if you lost 0 pounds? How would it make you feel? Immediately, people will say like, "Oh, terrible." But what happens if you lost 0 pounds, but your clothes fit different? Okay, that would be really good. What about if you lost 0 pounds, but your clothes fit different and you get compliments and people talk to you like, what are you doing? So and so. And at the same time, also your energy is better. Oh wow, yeah, that is the number gonna matter too much? Well, a little bit, but not as much. Okay. What happens if you're not performing better at the gym? You lost 0 pounds, but then your clothes, like you're now 2 sizes down, and you now have like obviously a toned body, and you're crushing at the gym, and you're just feeling like a different person. Would the weight matter? Not at all. So it's understanding, like, part of that self-fulfillment, self-confidence doesn't come from the number. It comes from the person you become as you go through that journey. And I think we talked about this a while back, which is like the changes that you make internally with you, the habits that you change to yourself that make you feel like you're becoming a better version of yourself, whether you lose the weight or not. Because people think they become a better version of themselves as they see the number drop. Unfortunately, we live in a society that, this the very same act of the very same weight loss, right? So that's really what predicates success, right? Weight loss, losing weight. And a lot of times, like, there's so much more that needs to be worked on that weight sometimes becomes irrelevant. So what I usually tell every single person that follow me or every single person that work with us is, put the weight on the sidelines, meaning let your life change, like, or your lifestyle changes and the way you think and all those different things like that and the way you eat be the driver of your success and your journey, and just let the weight on the side. We can be paying attention to it, or maybe we can't, when we don't have to, but just let that take care of itself. Like, that's going to happen whenever you change all those different things. And again, that goes down to creating the right scoreboards. How do we measure success? How clothes fit. How do we measure success? Well, maybe how, on a scale 1 to 10, how energetic did you feel? Right? Didn't you just told me, like, sometimes it happens a lot, that you're just tired of feeling tired, you're tired all the time and all those different things like that. Your success may be predicated because you have more financial stability, because you're not spending all your money on, eating out. Your success may be predicated on the fact that you're crushing workouts in the CrossFit gym that you go to, or the Orange Theory Fitness that you go to. Now you're getting PRs left and right, right? So it's creating the right scoreboard where they feel and they start to look and change their perception about themselves. Like, it's funny because yesterday I sent a survey out to our current clients that have completed at least 1 or 2 months, and we asked them, how are you doing? And actually, one of them, she said, like, it's changed. I was like, how does this program have changed your life? And I said, and she said, it's changed the way I think about my health, being more involving more than just food and exercise, but also lifestyle mindset changes. I feel better prepared to live a healthier lifestyle and sustain it. Right? A diet doesn't teach you that. A diet teaches you how to follow like directions, or follow directions on, okay, here's like A, B, C, do this. And people get to the goal, but then they don't have a goal after the goal. They don't have a plan after the plan. They don't have, and they never did it under really understanding those like really important areas, and that you have to really work through before you, and I mean, in a way, this is obviously similar to kind of going to a therapist, right? So like, let's say that you go to a therapist to work in some, like, issues on mental health, right? So like, somebody telling you to read a book, it's like, yeah, read this book and that'll fix your mental health. That's never going to happen. You have to talk through your issues. You have to work on some different kinds of things that go just beyond just reading a book, right? Anybody can read a book. I mean, we've read a book, and how many times we actually apply everything that we actually read in books, maybe for a week or so, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. It requires commitment. It requires, effort, and requires obviously go through very uncomfortable, freaky moments. That's the truth. That's where growth happens.
Yeah, and because it's so uncomfortable, I think it's important to recognize those small victories. And when you're hitting those scoreboard items, what are the like what writing that down in the evening, taking some time to do that, and then you can look back and say, I look at what all I've accomplished. So even if you're in those moments when you're not feeling very confident in yourself or in your progress towards your goals, you can look back and see, here's where I was a week ago, here's where I was 2 weeks ago. And then the last thing,
Exactly.
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, go
Oh,
ahead.
okay. What I think the last thing to talk about on the self-confidence piece is self-compassion, because I think that can also, like, we are often our own harshest critics, and if you're constantly berating yourself and telling yourself you're not doing well, then that's really going to take a hit to your self-confidence.
Yeah.
And would you say that's played a part in your journey at all?
Yeah, mine and everybody that we work with. And usually self-compassion, or compassion in general, like, it needs to come, two ways: internally, some self-compassion, and the compassion from others, right? And that's obviously something that those are really tough things to define, depending on your environment and your context, and who you surround yourself with. The self-compassion piece is simply more like, being, okay with the smaller wins and the smaller battles that you can win every day. We think of ourselves in terms of, like, for example, going back to the weight loss thing, that we had to lose, like, if we don't lose 4 pounds in the first 4 months, then we fail, right? Or the perfectionist mindset, right? Everybody has different personalities, where if I don't do everything perfect, on a specific day, I might as well do absolutely nothing, right? And then that kind of like leads to feelings of defeat. So sometimes it takes other people to notice that. Obviously, that's what, the job of a good coach should be, which is actually kind of praising people on what's going well, right? And it's saying, like, look at the things that you did, right? These things that you were not doing before, because people sometimes think that those things are meaningless and they're stupid. Sometimes I have clients like, this is just stupid, right? Like, yeah, I went on a walk, right? What's the big deal? Well, but you didn't go on a walk last week, and you never gone on a walk before, right? So these are things that even sometimes for me, we need to have people around us that can remind us, like, you are doing well. And look at what you did this week, right? I can finish up this week and say, like, oh my God, that was so busy, and I didn't get, and that happens to me all the time. I didn't get anything done. I didn't get this done, and I go look at my list, and I struggle with that all the time. But sometimes it's like my wife that needs to come to me. Is like, look, we got a couple new clients in the program. You did this. You serve all your clients perfectly. All your clients are happy. We're here in Mexico City. Like, look at all these wins, right? And I was like, you're right. So it's a lot of times changing your perception of yourself and your success, and really what that looks like. And that can actually help you be more compassionate about yourself. So that's one thing. But then also the compassion from others, which is, again, having somebody to remind you of that. But that can go two ways, right? Because a lot of times we can have, if you're surrounded by people that are not very supportive, right? I grew up in a Latino like culture, right? And we work with a lot of Hispanic population. And one of the big things in our culture, whether you're from Venezuela or Mexico, and again, I see this a lot of times also in America and perhaps also Canada, but one of the things about family is, like, they do place a big kind of focus on your appearance, right? And especially men and women, but mostly women, right? So the moms, the abuelitas, the grandmas, all the different things like that. It's crazy that the first thing that they say when they see you after they haven't seen you in a while is usually they would make a comment about your appearance. Oh my God, you gained some weight. Right? It's like, oh, or it's never usually like, you look great. It's usually either you gain some weight or you're looking too skinny, right? It's either like, you need to do something with your hair, or there's absolutely no comments at all. It's never anything praised, like nothing. And if it's something praised, like I've actually heard this before, like, oh my God, you look so pretty. How come you don't have a boyfriend, or you don't have obviously somebody, right? So it's always something like a negative connotation. And it's not like something that comes out as like a meaningful like or a mean thing, right? It's not something that is like I'm trying to hurt my daughter, my son, my goddaughter, whatever may be the case. It's just how we grew up. Our grandma always like my mom always said the same things. That my mom like always like kind of like my aunt. It's always typically going to be the same thing, and they don't say it to hurt your feelings, but they're doing it so deeply, and that's a big kind of issue that we have. Because this with the same mentality, when you're 10 years old, this is how we have like 3 clients who started dieting when they were 9 or 10 because their parents were thinking of those things, and then they think it's like a good thing for them, right? Because they're trying to kind of get them to lose weight, but they don't understand the impact that they're actually creating in that child's mind, and how that literally kind of like trickled down into the deep issues that they currently have in their nutrition and their health. So the way that people talk to you about your nutrition and your health has a huge and massive impact. When you tell somebody like, hey, you gained some weight, like I can tell you my own struggles, right? So mine is not being like you gained some weight. It can be like it's been in the past, but you look a little chunky. Or it's usually for me when I was growing up, I was like a skinny kid, right? So it's like, oh man, like you keep losing weight, or you look really skinny, or like, oh, you need to put on some beef on you or something like that. And those things I would just kind of laugh about it, but like internally and deep inside of me, it was actually kind of like eating me alive. I remember going through like department stores and working, and shopping for clothes. And I remember this vividly when I would kind of like walk through kind of like different mirrors, and I would try to like tighten on my shirt around my arms, because I felt like, okay, my shirts need to make sure like they need to kind of tighten around my arms. If they don't do that, then I'm too skinny. And I would like have so many different kind of insecurities around those things. And those are the same insecurities that kind of translated into, not always being able to be a shy person sometimes around, girls or women, or being, that person that never actually spoke with confidence with people when I was asking for something, whatever it may be the case. And some people may think it's like, no, that was not you, but this is exactly how I felt inside. Right. So it was because of those comments and external things from other people that would tell you, like, you look too skinny, you look too fat, you've gained some weight, what happened to you? Like, and then obviously the more day-to-day things, right? Like, are you going to eat that because they see you, right? And so like the same grandma that told you like, hey, you gained some weight, like, what happened? It's going to be the same one that will tell you like, you shouldn't be eating all this, you shouldn't be eating all that. And they have all this kind of like external, like, advice that kind of happens. And this, I see this all the time, right? And even with us, like, I'm a dietitian, and you know how many times I actually go to a place and then I'm eating something. It's like, I thought you were a dietitian. Yes, I am a freaking dietitian. I'm also human, right? And I enjoy my pizza and my beer. Thank you very much. And thank you for your unsolicited comment, right? Like, it's always things like that. Again, people don't say as a mean thing. It's just more about like the norm. It's the way it's always been done,
Yeah. So if people are getting comments like that from their family, or, well, either one is from strangers, and we can talk about that, but also from family members, what's your approach usually to responding to those kind of comments?
Well, it depends on the person. So if it's like a complete stranger, or something like that, like, let's say, for example, somebody, it's a pretty common thing, right? Somebody has their own dietary regime and it works well for them. So somebody like does low carb keto, and they see you eating a piece of bread, right? So they may have comments like, hey, you shouldn't really be eating that bread. It's like, oh, why is that? So a lot of times it's like, it's inviting a conversation, and usually it's like, oh, why is that? Oh, because bread is bad for me. Like, I ever since I cut that out, that's a very typical common conversation. Ever since I cut this out, I feel incredible. I feel all these different things, and I lost so much weight and stuff like that. So number one, what happens when these conversations happen, which it's every day, right? You can't go to a social event without having a conversation about nutrition, diet, weight. It's never like, it never, meaning like, it's always there. There's always a conversation about it, because sometimes I overhear people talking about it, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, like, look at all this food. I guess I'm going to start a diet on Monday. Right. So it's like the kind of thing that kind of happens. So in those kind of situations, what I typically invite people to do is like, oh, what I usually tell them to do is like, hey, I respect your journey and what you're doing with your nutrition, but I have my own goals and I know exactly what I'm doing, and I appreciate your advice, but I'm okay. I'm good. Thank you. And that's usually like a pretty like polite way to actually get people to back off. And it's like, oh, well, it's your health, like your future. Is like, well, thank you. It's true. It's my health. It's my future. Right. Like, thank you again for sharing those things, and best of luck with your current like program, whatever you're doing. And really honestly, I wish like you continue to be successful in what you're doing. So that's a really positive way to say to somebody like, back off, like it's none of your business, the way I typically eat. Now the problem that sometimes exists with some people is that they don't know whether it's that's actually true or not. That's obviously where coaching and nutrition help can actually help them understand this. Because if you're a person that is struggling with weight, right, and you keep reading all these different things online, where they're high carb, low carb, like do this and do that, right, and you're really internally trying to make that effort yourself to try to change by yourself, not with any help, and then you have a comment like that, then and you hear these things such as like, I lost X amount of weight, like those like trigger things for you, and you're like, okay, I guess like I shouldn't really touch this. And that starts to create such an imbalanced relationship with food, because now that Nancy told you that you shouldn't touch that bread because she doesn't touch it and she's lost 20 pounds. So in your mind, you go to bed thinking she lost 20 pounds. If I cut the bread, I'm going to lose 20 pounds. Right. But it creates this like spiral effect of things that is never something that can kind of last for a long time. And that's a big issue, you know?
Yeah, and
So
then you cut out the bread maybe the next week and then can't sustain it. You end up overeating all the carbs that you were restricting all week. And then maybe you hear someone talking about veganism. They're like, oh, I went vegan and I lost 20 pounds. You're like, oh, maybe I should go vegan and lose 20 pounds. And then you try that, and the why behind it isn't really there. And it's just this cycle. So and I think another interesting thing about those kinds of comments is it really comes from the person's own struggles and insecurities. 99% of the time, it's never really about you. They see you eating bread, they wish that they could be the person eating bread and feeling great about it, but because they can't do it, they're just going to put that criticism onto you.
and it's crazy you mentioned this, because so we're here in Mexico City, and my friend Val, she's an artist. And right now she has this like incredible, it's great to be in an artist's house because she has all her paintings around here. And she has this incredible, I don't know if she has any of them in here, but she's like working on this like kind of series, or her portfolio, that I think it's called like I don't know what she calls them in English, but I think it's like faces or reflections or something like that. And it's literally just faces with different eyes and different things like that. And really the whole connection of that is in the way that she kind of explains this, her art. It's like every time you see a face, you typically tend to see in their eyes a reflection of the things that you typically don't have, or that you wish that you had, something along those lines. So it's a reflection of your own insecurities. So you typically see in people the things that you feel insecure about. So if you feel like, obviously, oh my God, she has like beautiful hair, like obviously you may feel insecure about your hair. Oh my God, she has beautiful eyes, or oh my God, look at her body, right? Then you may feel insecure about your body. So what you see positive in other people and the reflection you see in them is exactly the insecurities that you typically carry. So it's exactly what you're saying, right? When you see other people's lifestyles, right? And you see, for example, like the highlight reel from people on Instagram, right? Anything they see is like where they feel insecure on. And this is obviously where, typically people preach on, or people or influencers and different things like that. That's exactly how they make their money, right? Because they see like the raised butt, right? And then like, they're like, oh my God, like, look at that glute. Like, I want to have something like that, right? Because it's exactly what they don't have. So they go and they buy like, the booty, whatever program, and the tea that is going to help them do that. So it's yeah, we're reflections of each other, but then we typically tend to see what we lack in other people. And that's a big thing. So it's exactly what you're saying. It's looking into, understanding that a lot of times like the things that people criticize about you is exactly the things that they don't have for themselves. And it's a big thing. And just to kind of finish up the part of like, how to deal with family and stuff like that. That's obviously with people you don't know. With family, you have to be a little bit more harsh, right? And you have to be a little bit more, step up to that, and just like kind of like, make yourself known, and explain and be honest about it, because a lot of times you just dealt with that so long that it's like, like you're just gonna kind of like smile and whatever, right? So, and and I think you do as well, because I actually, you wrote something here that I thought was really cool, which is like, I don't know, you don't mean that in a negative way. I'm really working to improve my nutrition and my relationship with food right now, and it's hard when I get comments about my food choices. So I'm just making choices that support my goals and that support my health and support myself, right? When you say that to a family member, like, what they're gonna say, they're typically gonna go and around, it's like, oh well, so such a dramatic or something like that. It's like, okay, cool, like, thank you, but that's exactly how I feel. So can we change the topic, and can you change the subject? Eventually the conversation is gonna die down, and you may get comments in the future about like, oh, don't tell her anything about food because she'll just obviously flip out, whatever. But at least it's better than people telling you and criticizing you for the decisions that you're typically making. So that's usually what I think is the best way to kind of manage a situation. So people listening to this, it needs to be something that they have to practice. Like, and usually I tell people, like, if they're fearful of saying something like this to their mom, to their spouses, to the spouse thing is a big issue, because this is where I see the biggest kind of problems, when the spouse is the person that has his comments towards their loved ones. It's like, hey, you need to lose some weight, and I see it so often. It's such a difficult thing. Imagine like your wife or your husband, like, particularly like, or like they tell you like, hey, you need to lose some weight, you've gained some weight, right? And me and GB have talked about it. It's like, if you ever see me like I'm not taking care of myself, I want you to tell me. But it's also hard to kind of tell somebody that, and there's way different ways to do it. And it's like, hey, like, I've noticed that you haven't really been paying attention to your nutrition habits as you used to, and I'm just more concerned about your health and what that actually can mean. And some people may take it like, are you saying that I'm gaining weight? It's like, I'm not saying that. I'm just simply saying that I'm noticing that you're not. And I tell that to GB all the time. Or sometimes she tells me like, you're eating a lot of more processed foods, you're skipping meals, you're doing different things like that. I just want to make sure that we care about, we typically for each other and for our health, and we said that we're always going to be looking after each other. So that's kind of like the way that a lot of times that conversations can go. But the best way you can do this is literally to practice in the mirror. If you're just fearful to have conversations like this with people, and say these different things to yourself in the mirror, right? So you have the confidence to be able to say it to other people.
Yeah, and I think the comment about the weight gain, usually the person will know. Like if someone's gained weight, it's not like they're just like, oh, like I feel the same. Like usually with people, especially women, I think are pretty conscious about that. So if it's their partner, I think the priority should be, I've noticed that you like, how are you feeling lately? And just checking in, because usually that weight gain isn't happening just for fun. Like it's maybe there's something going on in their lives, maybe they're stressed and they're stress eating. There's usually something else there. And so being a supportive partner looks like asking what the thing is that might be leading to the weight gain, rather than criticizing the person, and
Yeah. and
making them
and,
feel
and
bad
it's
about
it's
themselves.
crazy that you mentioned this. Yeah, and it's crazy that you mentioned this, because it's exactly what you're saying. A lot of times, like, people don't gain weight on purpose, unless you're an athlete and whatever. But in general, when you're talking about gaining weight, there's always something that triggered that new habit or lifestyle that kind of happened, and it's usually going to be rooted in stress. Like, for example, the amount of people that started gaining weight throughout the pandemic, right? Was it the fact that they were like more sedentary and moving less and just like locked up at home? Sure, that's obviously a big part of it, right? But there's people that didn't make that an excuse, and they still obviously continue to do certain things to help them stay active, and that didn't happen to them. So why did it happen? Well, it's because of a life change. Anytime that we change our lives, like, it's very uncomfortable, and sometimes when we feel uncomfortable, we try to guard ourselves in things that we know, try to guard ourselves in things that are like, something that it's familiar to us. And usually when, for example, like, this is the best way analogy I can think about it. If you go to a social event and you have abs and you don't know anybody, it's awkward, right? It's really weird, because you're walking around and you're trying to figure, like, try to see. And if you're not a person that is like very comfortable connecting with people out of the blue, it's difficult for you. But let's say like you're walking through and then you see somebody, right, that oh my God, you're going to go straight to that person. Oh, and then you stay with that person altogether. So I want you guys to think of uncomfortable moments and situations in your life, right? And what's familiar to you? Maybe perhaps the familiar person that you saw in that really awkward place. And the analogy in your life is like it's food, right? It's like you're moving to this new place, you don't know anybody, or you have all the different changes with your kids and your family, and the one common denominator that always made you feel good was food, right? So then you guard yourself around food, like you guarded yourself with that person because you don't want to talk to anybody else, right? And then what kind of happens is like, usually in the analogy that I'm explaining, you actually fail on meeting a lot of other people because you were just too, afraid to make a change, put yourself out there to meet other people. In the case of nutrition, you're going to obviously have the weight gain because you were just too afraid to do all the things that were uncomfortable, such as signing up for a new gym or actually going on a walk or doing all the things that you were supposed to do. Just talked to somebody yesterday, like, oh, like asking, why is this now the time for you? It's like, well, I just gained all this weight. It's like, why did you gain the weight? Well, because I was moving and I stopped working out and all those different things like that. And when we dive deeper into why these things typically happened, it's always related to that. It's a new situation. I didn't have the time. Time is never an issue. It's usually like, not, it's just an awkward situation for them in the moment, very uncomfortable, and they try to find themselves, using things like alcohol or food to try to, guard themselves, right? And inconvenience and different things like that. So it's more difficult for them to be able to kind of stick to something.
Yeah. So there's one last thing I wanted to talk about today, which I think you're in a good position to give some advice on this because say these people are making comments about your food habits and you've practiced and you know what to say, but those comments still they still stick with you. Um, and so I think what a good topic to discuss is how to stop caring as much what other people think. And the reason I say that you might be a good person to talk about this is because your business is built on social media. You get a lot of people, not a lot of people, but occasionally on TikTok, there'll be people who are making
Yeah,
dumb
mean comments or
comments.
whatever.
And so
Yeah.
how have you been able to deal with that? And what advice could you give to someone about not caring as much what people think?
I think to stop completely caring about what other people think would be a lie for anybody. It never fully happens, right? They're like comments still bother you some way or shape or form. You just react to them differently. If I get like a really mean comment, sometimes I still get that thing inside of me, like that little kind of like I think about it like a nail that just kind of like or spike that just kind of like got stuck in some part of my body, right? It's annoying and it bothers you, and unless you kind of like remove it and they kind of like get rid of it, then you're not going to be able to kind of get rid of that. And I still deal with that on a daily basis and comments and from people that we talk to people that that just follow me on social media or sometimes like people that say things to you. So how do you deal with criticism? How do you deal with negative comments and different things like that? One is you change your perception on what they're saying and understand obviously the point or where is that comment or those things coming from. Is it a place of hate or is it a place of ignorance? And usually it's usually going to be like a place of ignorance, right? So when people say certain things like to me, for example, like, oh, like look at this like so-called dietitian telling people to eat carbs, when we clearly know that carbs are the reason why people are gaining weight. And so that's a comment made out of like ignorance, not necessarily out of like clear understanding of human physiology and different things like that, and human understanding of research. So my perception is like I just kind of like give a smirk and I say like, oh, thank you so much for your comment. I think a lot of times when you reply to hate with love, for as cheesy as that may sound, and with positivity, typically is always going to be better. So when somebody says like, how crazy that you're just such a so-called dietitian, that it kind of gives like, oh, thank you so much for your comment. I appreciate your opinion. What are you going to say to that? Right? Nothing. You're just not going to respond. Right. And people are going to feel like, they get mad because like I didn't start an argument, right? I didn't start like that's something that we typically see in social media. So when people say something and how to deal with that negativity and the comments like, oh, like it looks like you gained some weight, like what happened? I was like, Thank you so much for your comment. I haven't really made it a priority, but I appreciate obviously your concern. How are your kids? It's a simple
Yeah.
pivot to try to like make it work. Now, you internally, you got to work on things such as, where did that comment came from? Because it may still affect you, right? It may still affect you because you'll go home and it's like you'll start to think about, or you'll be thinking about that the whole entire night that you're there. So it's thinking, okay, that comment came from a place of ignorance. It came from a place of maybe like insecurity, came from a place of whatever. And which typically, it's funny, like people usually that make those comments, I'm not gonna like be mean here, but then when you look at them, they have their own kinds of same struggles, right? It's like, hey, you gain some weight. It's like, oh, how about you, right? Like that's what you internally want to say, right? But we don't really say because we want to make sure that we don't level up to the same kind of level of meanness. And the other part too is like understanding, like, and this is obviously something important, that you are writing your own book, and you're holding the pen to that book. So you trying to compare it to somebody else or trying to obviously care too much about what other people think and try to do things based on the way they do it is you're putting down your pen and trying to live somebody else's book or trying to be on somebody else's chapter in their life. And this is usually something that happens on social media. Comparison syndrome, right? Like you're comparing yourself to that person and how you're at, and that happens to me all the time. So that's me trying to kind of go and live somebody else's life instead of obviously kind of like focusing on my own life and my own one. So instead of me writing my own book, I just choose to read somebody else's and not write my own story. Right. So that's, I think, a bigger, like when people, for example, then they think about finances and success and business and stuff like that. And you think about some of the most successful people. I think it's what's his one of these like billionaires guys, the guy freaking forgot his name, but he didn't become a millionaire until he was like 50 or 60 years old, right? So then people would think like, oh my god, like people are trying to kind of make money, like look at this guy. It's like, well, but everybody starts at different places, right? And I think that's like a key thing to remember, and a better way to kind of deal with that. And also, and the last piece here is going to be self-affirmation, right? Like the more like you love yourself, the more you love yourself in the process that you're kind of like building, the less those comments typically like hurt you or affect you, right? The more that you kind of talk to yourself kindly with, as you mentioned, self-compassion, and the more you think like, I'm okay, I'm doing okay, I'm great, I'm confident, all the different things like that, and vocalize it, say it out loud. Like, I am a great dietitian. I am in shape. I am fit. I am feeling good. I have a great life. I have this and I have that. And I am. The more you repeat yourself those things, the more your subconscious will start to actually believe it. And the more that those comments and criticism for other people, they're going to be like, it's kind of like you're building your own inner armor. Okay. And the more that you talk to yourself about those things, the more you build that, the less like those spikes that I talked about are going to hurt you. And then have you ever seen those like movies where like the Terminator or whatever, like they shoot them and they're like, look at it and like take the thing out and they just kind of put it down. You want to become that person where you have such a strong armor that no matter what criticism you get, you're still going to be able to kind of like remove the bullet, remove the spike, and then just move on with your life. Smile and like, thank you for your comment, moving on, type of thing. That's the point, that's the kind of armor that I have tried to build for myself. But that takes a lifetime to do. That's obviously when you talk to like older people, you think they care one shit about like what you tell them, like, hey, did you get some weight? Please, I'm 70 years old. Like, their armor is so built up and then they just don't care anymore, right? So that's kind of the mentality that you had to kind of adopt in order for you to be able to get to that point.
Yeah, and also if you're in the situation where maybe you aren't feeling super confident, but you're on the way to making some of those choices to improve your life, you can say with the affirmations, I'm becoming the kind of person. I'm becoming the kind of person
Yeah.
who is taking care of their health. I am working to feel better about my body. It can be in progress with some of those affirmations. And the last thing that I just thought that I wanted to mention is something that I say to myself a lot. It's from an author I really like called Drew Dudley. His name's Drew Dudley, and he has a book about leadership that's really good. He says, "Elevate, don't escalate." So if someone makes a negative comment to you, you can go the escalate route. You could go fire right back at them, But if the situation, like, you can also elevate that situation by being, you know, taking the high road, I guess. And if you respond with, as you said, respond with love, that elevates the situation.
Yeah, and that's usually the best. And sometimes we're inclined to do the opposite, right? We don't want to respond with love. We want to obviously just kind of go at this person because you feel so what's it called? And usually that's when we get defensive, right?
Yeah.
When we just simply, the moment that we get the comment, we just simply kind of, and that happens to us. That happens to me all the time. I say GB says something kind of like that she didn't mean, or something like really kind of got my nerve. Like I will get defensive instead of like trying to understand the situation and where she's coming from in those situations. And that again takes practice, because we're just so used to fire back, like, what did you just say? Boom. And then that kind of turns into conflict. And we're very conflicted people because of that same reason. Especially when you're like, particularly like in social media and stuff like that, if you have a presence there, or even in just your own life, right? And you think about this, like, what's it called, like, when we live in let's say in a city where there's like this like tight group of people, and they all talk about each other and stuff like that, that's usually where that most of that toxicity comes from, because it's like what so and so is saying about so and so. So it's difficult to deal with, but then the best way to do it is like dealing with it. One of it is indifference, and what you're saying too, indifference is just simply meaning like don't pay attention to it, right? That's the other way to actually acknowledge that, is it, especially on social media, like you get a mean comment, no response.
Yeah.
That person gets mad because there's no response. That means obviously, like, I don't have time for you, dude. Like, it's like my time is too valuable for me to listen to things that are completely are like gonna like blow in the wind, and they're not gonna matter in like 10 minutes from now, because it's exactly what it is. So that's another way to think about it.
Yeah. Great.
Cool.
Well, I think that brings
That
us to the end of the episode
we'll
today.
we'll put a bow on that with that. Yeah. So great conversation for people listening in. This is what we do in every day. It's like having this conversation so you can become a better version of yourself. And if you are a person that struggles with this, a person that every single thing that we said here today was like, damn, that actually kind of hit really deep in me. That's exactly how I feel. You're not alone. You're probably kind of struggling with some of the same things that millions of people typically struggle with. And the problem that we see is like people don't seek out for help, and they try to like DIY, right? They try to do it themselves to try to figure and solve the situation, and sometimes they do so successfully, but a lot of times they keep going back into that. You keep trying to put band-aids into the deeper kind of issue and root cause of your problems. And this is just more of an invitation for you to reach out to us, or to whoever can help you obviously solve some of these different problems. Now, we do obviously help people do that through our programs and our coaching. And, we would love to help you if you're listening to this and this is something that you feel like, this is a time for me to make sure that this is a priority so I can work through this journey myself. And if that's the case, in the show notes, you're going to be able to find a link that takes us directly into, an application. So you can obviously tell us more about you. Maybe perhaps we can jump on a call to help you solve this, again, these issues in these situations for you, and coach you, not only in your nutrition, but also in your mindset and your lifestyle, and kind of hopefully changing that for the better. So you can become that 2.0 version of yourself that perhaps you were at some point, or perhaps you've never been, and you want to become. So with that, if you enjoyed this episode, as usual, make sure you kind of give us a shout out at Andres Ayesta on Instagram, or at Nivel to Nourish, and just let us know what you thought. And if you enjoyed, again, like this episode a lot, just give us a tag and let us know how we did. And any questions you may have, that's exactly how you can reach us. So with that, we finish out this episode. Thank you, Kenzie, for a great conversation. We'll see you guys next week on another episode of the Nutrition Blueprint podcast. Have a great one.